No, after you've been in prison, you get a bill. Pay-to-stay laws are common across the country, but here in Connecticut, people are fighting back, taking Connecticut to court, saying they paid their debt to society and now shouldn't have to pay prison debt to the state. Dan Barrett, legal director for the ACLU Foundation of Connecticut, is here with us now to break it all down. Thanks so much for being here, Dan.
No problem. Hi, Emma.
Hi. So tell me, for those who don't know, what actually is prison debt?
Yeah, in 1997, the Connecticut legislature decided to enact a statute that charged people, as you said, for every day that they're in prison. So in our little state, when a person is sentenced to prison as punishment for a crime, they don't just go to prison, which is an immense punishment in itself. They're also handed a bill for each and every day that they're in there. Right now, for the most recent fiscal year in which the Department of Correction has set a daily rate, that's $249 a day, or just over $90,000 a year.
You mentioned $249 a day. Two people came to you, to the ACLU, representing this class action lawsuit. Can you tell me a little bit about that case and about their stories?
Sure. So we have three what are called named plaintiffs. Teresa Beatty, who's from Stamford. We've got Natasha Tasato, who's from Hamden, and we've got Doug Johnson, who's from down Branford, Milford, the kind of southern portion of the state. And they all have one thing in common, or they have two things in common. Number one, they did time in prison. They were sentenced to incarceration. And number two, they had a loved one who died, and they inherited money from that loved one. But when they did that, the state showed up in probate court with its hand out to say, gee, you owe us for the amount of time, the number of days that you spent in prison. And so these people all lost a loved one, and now they're being handed a bill for the time that they spent in prison, even though, of course, they served their sentence. They did everything right. They got out. They got back on their feet. All three are success stories. And yet here's the state turning around and saying, it doesn't matter that you did everything right, you lawfully served your sentence. You still owe us a huge amount of money.
And so pay-to-stay laws in this country's prison system dating back to the Civil War era, a lot of people argue it's about accountability. What do you have to say to that?
Well, accountability comes in the form of serving the sentence, as well as anything else that the criminal court imposes as punishment. In Connecticut, that can include a fine, for example, or restitution. But our pay-to-stay law is not old at all. It's only from 1997. And it is part of, I think, sort of the worst of the 90s tough on crime policies that have just destroyed lives and cost the state a lot of money and generally spread around the misery. It's inconceivable in today's day and age. I mean, we all live in Connecticut. We know things here are expensive. There's a housing crisis. That it's very hard to find certain jobs. The very last thing that it makes sense to do is to get somebody who's coming right out of prison and say, oh, and by the way, you owe us more than what 2 years would cost of UConn tuition, room, and board. So it's a new thing in Connecticut, and it's a bad thing. It's something that never should have been enacted. It turns out it's also unconstitutional, and it's a terribly cruel idea.
So we've been talking about those dollar amounts and that money. Some people say, on the flip side, instead of accountability, it's also more economic. Right now, on the state's website, when explaining prison debt, it says, quote, an offender may be required to reimburse the taxpayers for his or her stay in a correctional facility. As you said before, the state is currently bringing in around $4 to $6 million annually through prison debt. I know you said that stay in prison is accountability itself, but what do you think about this reimbursement?
Well, it's not exactly reimbursement. Reimbursement, as the state uses it, is a fancy way of saying imposing a fine on someone for whatever the state decided to spend during that particular time. So the state sets the rate in a really simplistic way. It sets the rate at the end of every fiscal year. It looks back at everyone who served time during that year, and it says, gee, we decided for a variety of political decisions, a variety of logistical reasons to spend X dollars. And because you were one of the people who were incarcerated during that time, Your proportional share is Y. So it's an incredibly broad and ham-fisted way of arriving at a dollar amount for a person to owe. But all of these things are beyond the control of the person who's incarcerated. In fact, they won't even know, they can't even know by operation of our law how much they're going to owe until years later when the Department of Corrections sets the rate for every year in which they were in prison. So it's a punishment on top of a punishment.
Gotcha. And you mentioned Teresa Beatty, a part of that lawsuit. She was being asked to pay for her time in jail pre-trial too. Is that correct?
That's right. Connecticut charges people for pretrial detention. And so in Connecticut, our pretrial detention population, those people who have been arrested and cannot afford to make bail, that has stayed stable or has begun to grow while the post-sentence population has declined. And so Connecticut still has a big problem with incarcerating poor people prior to trial. And yet it also will turn around and say, oh, by the way, for the time in which you sat in jail because you could not afford bail, we are going to charge you at this rate $249 a day. It's cruelty upon cruelty. So a person can end up owing a fantastic amount of money. I mean, right now, if a person were to go in for a 1-year sentence, they would come out with $90,000 of debt.
So a lot of lawmakers in our state right now saying the bail formula really needs to be looked at, saying things like it keeps poor people in jail cells and lets rich people out no matter the level of their crime. What are your thoughts about that and about the bail system in Connecticut as a whole? Do you believe it needs improvement?
Yes, I think any criticism that focuses on the comparative wealth of the people who are being held in detention is absolutely spot on. So we ought to zoom out and ask ourselves, if the state is willing to let someone go for a price, why does it make sense that the person who can pay walks and the person who can't stays? That is to say, the system has decided for a variety of strange reasons that there's a dollar amount on freedom. There's no state interest at all in allowing the person who can pay out, but punishing the person who can't pay by keeping them in. There's already been a decision that there is a threshold in which they can be released. And the net result is, if you look at the stats, you actually look at the people who are in pretrial detention in Connecticut, they cannot afford even small amounts of bail. So you get into a situation in which it's very common if you watch arraignments, criminal arraignments, this is the initial appearance of a person before a judge. The prosecution will ask for $25,000 or $30,000, and the person says, I have zero. And a lot of times the court will say, well, let's split the difference. It's 15 or it's 10. Well, $10,000. Forget Connecticut. There's virtually no one in America who has $10,000 just rattling around their bank account. And the operation of it is that people who don't have money just sit in pretrial detention. And even worse, they will agree to plead guilty to crimes they did not commit solely to be released faster so they can get back to their families, they can avoid a housing crisis, they can try to salvage their job, that sort of thing. So it has kind of a multiplier effect on injustice in this state.
And quickly, Dan, last question here. What's the status of that lawsuit right now?
So right now we filed what's called an amended complaint. So we've added some plaintiffs to the case, Natasha and Doug, who I told you about earlier. They're very compelling stories. And, I think it's a lawsuit that ought to get people's attention because we're talking about people who have lost a loved one, who have, in many cases, been far away from their incarceration, done everything right. They're back on their feet. That's absolutely true for Natasha and for Doug. They are success stories. And yet here's the state turning around and saying, well, maybe we want to take away another means of support for you. We want to take away another way of getting you back into society, back to enjoy the success that your hard work should be rewarding you for. So most people I talk to don't even know that Connecticut has prison debt. They think that it's limited to Alabama and sort of places that are a little more famously cruel towards incarcerated people. But it's right here in our home state, and it's patently unconstitutional.
And we'll be keeping an eye on that lawsuit. Thank you so much again, Dan, for being with us here.